as well. So
Good.
oh yeah, your picture of Stace is on there. It's like the third one in. Okay, average. And then a black one afterwards. Good now. Okay. Now, just to make things all more complicated, Ian wanted to play Can't Get No Satisfaction. Minimize this. Mouse, you're driving me bonkers. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's great to have you here. My name is Glenn Lundberg, organise the Eternity Talks, hosted by an organisation called the City Bible Forum. We're aiming to ask the bigger questions in the midst of the city, in the midst of life and work, ask the bigger questions about why we're here and what matters and where do we find meaning and purpose. In the background, you probably heard some music playing. Quick quiz for you. Who played it?
Rolling Stones.
Rolling Stones. Well done. Song was? Can't Get No Satisfaction. Out. He's good. Released when?
1966.
Ooh, very close. 65.
65. You could argue 66 in Australia. He wouldn't know.
Yeah. Fair call. Fair call. I wouldn't know. One question. Is there something more? A French thinker and philosopher called Albert Camus said that when you glimpse beauty, it's like glimpsing eternity, and you ache to hold on to it when you see something truly beautiful. There's this kind of desire to hold on to it. There's this desire for something more. On the flip side, sometimes when something unfolds, there's a song that Ian, our speaker, wanted me to find, but we don't have time to play it now, called Is This All There Is? Now, quiz for you. Is This All There Is? Sung by PJ Harvey in the last couple of years, but originally sung by Peggy Lee, who sang. Did she sing Fever? Was she the original person who sang Fever?
I don't know about that.
Okay, Peggy Lee. The house burns down, and she kind of says at the end of the song, "Is this all there is?" And then her dad takes her along to a circus, and she says, "Oh, is this all there is? It was great, but is this all there is?" And then her husband leaves her, and she says, "Is this all there is to love?" And then she kind of talks in the ballad, "Oh, maybe I should take my life." No, I won't. I don't want to rush to that final great disappointment. It's a bit of a lament, but worth watching. If you're old school, Peggy Lee; new school, PJ Harvey. It's also sung, I think, at the Melbourne festival by a different lady a couple of years ago. Let me invite Ian up to come and speak to us. And give him a round of applause. He's all the way from Sydney. He needs all the help he can get.
I do.
So, Sydney, you've come from Sydney. You've recently been in Uganda, though. Why were you there?
I have, and I've even got the tie to prove it. This is probably one of the very few Ugandan Christian university ties in Australia.
I suspect so.
I was there because, look, they had a serious academic who was supposed to come and give some talks, and he couldn't come. So I joked with them, they went from having Einstein to having Mo from the Three Stooges. So they just said, we really need some help, and there was a guy who I'd met when he was doing his PhD in Sydney, Alfred, and he said, "Can you come? I think it'd work." I said, "Man, I know nothing about Africa. I mean, I know where it is on the map." But he said, so I went there and spoke for about a week or so. Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you.
Our format's very simple. Ian's going to speak for, he promises, 25 minutes. Then what we'll do is open up the floor to question and answer. We're having a go at live streaming at the moment, so it's being streamed live on YouTube. So hello to whoever's
Why aren't you here?
Yeah.
You lazy person.
It's a good question.
Pretending to work at lunch, it doesn't work.
Sorry. So we'll have some question and answer at the end, and notepad there to take comments, and we've got a feedback card at the end. Over to you.
Thanks, mate. It is good to be here, though. When I looked out and saw the river, as a Sydney sider, I just think that's a dangerous river that floods. Also, the last state of origin, less said about the last quite a few, the better. But I remember watching the last one thinking, worst case scenario is Queensland wins again and Greg Inglis gets injured, which was exactly what happened as a South supporter. So anyway, it is lovely to be in Queensland, although my daughter's left Queensland, sadly. It was funny when I used to come up here sometimes to serve at City Bible Forum, also to be able to drop in and see her, but she's gone to Canberra. Her husband was in big demand, having done his degrees here. Now, the Peggy Lee song, I'm not a Peggy Lee fan, but it's worth listening to her on YouTube or something like that. It really is a gravelly, it's a very sensual song, the way she sings it. She just, sees these various things that should be. She watches her house burn down, and is that all there is? And then the circus, as was said, and then she falls in love, and she gets her heart broken, and is that all there is to love? And the chorus goes, well, let's keep dancing, let's break out the booze, which is a classic response, really, perhaps not as conscious as hers, to the problem there is when we get disappointed with life. Alcohol is the great... it's the great medication that our culture takes. It murders memory, but as you know, normally deepens problems at the other end, unfortunately. Now, Ecclesiastes is a book in the Bible, and if you haven't read many of the 66 books in the Bible, and you're an adult, it's a good thing to do, at least to read some. Back where I come from in Sydney, and I met two white guys in Uganda, one from England and one from Norway, and we had a bit of a chat about the Jesus thing, and both of them came up with the classic Sydney answer. That is, lots of opinions about God. Have you had a chance, since you became an adult, to read one of the 4 biographies about Jesus? The answer was classically, as always, no. And it's just kind of, and I think, and both of them were kind of surprised when they, gee, I really should. And I said, that one of the Gospels will take you less than an hour. It's always better to read a source rather than just pick up second-hand opinions. But perhaps the strangest book in the 66 books of the Bible is the book Ecclesiastes. Written almost certainly by King Solomon, the wisest and the wealthiest and the most successful of all of Israel's kings. And it's an exploration in this question of what is it really about. And when I had the fun of working at a boys' school for 9 years, I would sometimes read the senior boys parts of Ecclesiastes, and the regular response was, that's not in the Bible, because it's just not what people think a sacred book should say. It's kind of cynical and moody and melancholic. And he makes sort of hard statements about God, about the life God has left us with here on the earth. You know, it's toilsome, it's weariness, it seems to get nowhere. And this is the burden God has left us with. So it's a wonderful book. It's a short book. And we're going to look at one verse, which is the title for today's talk, about God having put eternity in our hearts. But even that is not entirely good, because it says, but he hasn't given us the answers. So let's have a look at this question of what is it that makes life really worth living, and that won't ultimately disappoint us? Or do we just have to face the fact that life is an inherently fundamentally disappointing business, and the more you think about it, the more likely you are to be depressed? Now, George Bernard Shaw, a great opponent of Christianity when he was alive, is famous for many quotes. One of them, he says, there are 2 great tragedies in life, and you probably know how it goes. One is to and the other tragedy is getting what you want. Now, there's a number of very interesting moments we can get from people who are very, very successful, particularly if they're honest. I remember a friend of mine, he was expelled from a private school and joined us at a government school in year 10. And Rick bought a bass guitar, he heard Led Zeppelin, and decided, that's what I want to do. And we used to mock him. Lovely man, and he's still a lovely guy. We used to mock him as, rock and roll star. And in the end, he did. He played in a number of Australia's leading bands. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 3 times, which is quite rare. And but he rang me up. We'd sort of lost touch. Our lives had moved apart. We used to send messages to each other through a mutual friend. And one time, we actually made the phone call and caught up. We went down to Bondi Beach and had breakfast. And Rick said to me, he said, I guess you're wondering why I wanted to meet. I said, well, not particularly. It was just fun that we finally caught up. He said, here's what happened. He said, you might remember when I was at school, I was a fairly unhappy guy. Well, I was a fairly superficial guy, so I hadn't picked it up, unfortunately. But he said, I always thought if I could get a few things together, I would be happy. He said, I thought if I could find a woman who would really love me, if I could have children, if I could actually make a living playing bass guitar, and he said, if I could have a house that overlooked the harbour. And he said, a few months ago, I suddenly realised I'd got them all. Now, it's very, very rare, in spite of what we say, that anyone gets, the full house. And he said, and I'm as unhappy as ever. And I began to think, I know you sort of got into religion, when we were 19. I thought maybe that might hold some of the answers. Because, to quote Jack Higgins, the great writer, The Eagle Has Landed and other things like that, highly respected by those of his genre, he said, I wish someone had told me when I was young that when you get to the top of the mountain, there is nothing there. And my friend had got to the top of the mountain and discovered it didn't deliver. I mean, he was happier, I guess, than when life was all ugly. And this sort of experience, it eludes most of us because most of us have never arrived. You know, most of us still think, if only I have my house, or if only I could find a husband or a wife, or if only my husband or wife would be nicer and more understanding. If only I had children. If only I had nicer children. We're always thinking. There's always something we think. I would be happy if. And studies have been done in Australia showing that no matter how much pay you get, we all think we'd be happy if we got roughly 30% more. And a friend of mine asked a woman who he was house cleaning for, who had 2 Mercedes in the drive, lived on Palm Beach, which you may know is one of the most ridiculously wealthy suburbs. It's where famous people come and rent houses if they come for the summer. So that's where she lived. And Ken said to her, "Do you have enough money?" She said no. He said, "How much more do you think you need?" 30%. It was quite extraordinary, because it's exactly what the read said. But those of us who haven't arrived can keep thinking, the reason I'm not really, truly, thoroughly, deeply happy is because these things are missing. And that's why it's helpful sometimes to get a word back from the mountaintop. An honest person. Let me give you one from a woman, Raquel Welch. She's a famous actress or just a famous body? I don't know. But my brother had a 6-foot-long poster of her on his ceiling when I was growing up. And I presume she was a great Shakespearean actress. But here's her observation. She wrote in a magazine, "I had acquired everything I had ever wanted, yet I was totally miserable. I thought it very peculiar that I had acquired everything I'd wanted as a child: wealth, fame, accomplishment in my career. I had beautiful children, I had a lifestyle that seemed terrific, yet I was totally and miserably unhappy. I found it very frightening that one could acquire all these things and still be so miserable." That's a bit unsettling, isn't it? Because it's not just she's not just successful in her career. Marlon Brando, with the last one I mentioned, Marlon Brando, a very famous actor, he's dead now. He seemed to me to have sex with every famous woman I've ever heard of, really, have various relations, and he was wealthy and highly esteemed because of his acting career. In a recent biography, Brando Unzipped, he said this: "I searched for but never found what I was looking for, either screen or it. Glamorous, turbulent life, but completely unfulfilling." So it's interesting that when people in our community, and there are many other quotes like that I'm sure some of you will know, and you see it in a song like Satisfaction. The Stones are not known for profound lyrics. They've got 2 or 3 songs that are quite thoughtful. Gimme Shelter's another one, I think. But Mick Jagger was 22 when he wrote that song. He was already reasonably wealthy, and he was rocketing up. He was famous, he was adored, but he writes a song, "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." It's quite intriguing that he would write a song like that at that young age. But for us underachievers, we're kept a little safe because we can have the illusion that, okay, well, if I had it, then I would be happy. There's something strange about being human. It doesn't seem that other animals have this same phenomena of achieving everything you could possibly think they needed and yet be often dangerously unhappy. It puzzles sometimes people when very successful people commit suicide. But I think, and there'll be multiple reasons behind that, but they can't hide anymore from the fact that there's something deeply missing, and they don't know what the answer is. As a close relative of mine was saying to me recently, he's reputation. But he said to me, you know, I've done everything society asked me to do. You know, I've got married, I've had the kids, I've educated the kids, I've paid my taxes, I've worked hard as an engineer, and now he and his wife are well off, they travel quite a lot. He said, now what? And there's a real sense in which he's just filling in time till he dies. He's been, seems to me, almost everywhere you can imagine for holidays, and they look fantastic. I see the pictures, they look fantastic. But there's that sense of, well, okay, for what? Now, this is an experience that won't surprise you that the Bible talks about, and this book of Ecclesiastes deals with it. Again, even if you just download it from the net, which you can do, I discovered you can't do that in Yemen. Because when I was in Uganda, I met a man who had to flee Yemen after he became a Christian. But when he began to be interested in Christianity, you couldn't get a Bible in Yemen, and the government's actually locked it off. You can't even get it through the net. So he tried to smuggle one in and got in trouble, in terrible trouble. But you can download it anywhere you like off the net. But here's the basic theme of the book. The words of the teacher, the son of David, the king of Jerusalem, this is chapter 1, verse 1. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. It's a very 20th century feeling, that sort of, and the word is emptiness. It's shallowness. It's breath. It's the idea of vapor. It's the idea of mist. Everything is just mist. And he then goes through the book and tries different ways to find meaningfulness, pleasure, success, builds great buildings and engages in all sorts of things, seeks philosophy and wisdom, but in the end, that's the cry. Meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. In chapter 3, there's the thing about there's a time for this and a time for that and a time for this and a time for that. You hear that sometimes at funerals, and it got turned into a very sweet little song by the Seekers, although it's not really a sweet little passage. It really, if you read it, it's got a certain tediousness between it. It's just it's this, it's life and death. It's tearing and healing. It's speaking and silence, and on it goes. Then you get to this point here in verse 9. What does the worker gain from his toil? I've seen God has laid on men. He's made everything beautiful in its time. He's also set hearts of men. Yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know there is nothing better for man than to be happy, to do good while they live, that every man must eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. Just because of the briefness of time, just to major on that central verse where it says, he's made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of humans, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from the beginning to the end. There's an interesting contrast here between Christianity and the Bible and Buddhism, because sometimes when people get desperate, in fact, it's the religion of choice in our culture. Down in Sydney, when people want to get meaningful and they want to try to find some peace in the madness, they'll tend to go to some sort of meditation-y Buddhism stuff. The number of my friends that are sort of into Buddhism is a bit nauseating, really. They're not really into any serious type of Buddhism, because the Sermon of the Fires is the Buddha's fundamental sermon. It's like the Sermon on the Mount. It's worth reading. It's quite short. And it basically pours scorn on all pleasures. Pleasures of the tongue, pleasures of the nose, pleasures of the ear, pleasures of the body. That things are beautiful. The work is good. It's satisfying to eat and drink and to work hard. The Bible doesn't say, oh, that's wicked and wrong and a delusion, get out of it. Go and live, in a monastery somewhere and get detached. It's not what it's saying. These things are good. They're from God. Work is good. It's right that when you achieve something and you finish some contract or you finish some particular work, that you feel good about it. You go and celebrate. Buy the French champagne, enjoy it. That's a good thing from God. But it says that there's still something, there's a splinter in our heart. It still doesn't actually satisfy, ultimately, if we stop and pause. And he says this because God has placed eternity in our hearts. That there's something, and it's his fault. He could have made us like dogs. And frankly, the Australian dream is a very good dream for a dog. Have you thought about that? Because when's a dog happy? If it's got a place to live, it's got food in its bowl, it's got a few friends to play with, and when it's mating season, if there's someone of the opposite sex to have sex with. That's one happy dog. Right? And yet, fundamentally, that's the Australian dream. And God could have made us like dogs, but unfortunately, he's put eternity in your heart. And every now and then, you will be reminded that there is this desire for something weighty and substantial. And that which is everlasting and eternal has got that sense. It's the opposite of meaninglessness, vapor, breath. It's God has put in your heart. He's knitted it in. It's unavoidable. This longing for, this interest in this concern about those things that last. Why are we more concerned about cancer than a cold? Because in the end, one lasts for a week or so, the other lasts until your life's end, often. Right? So those things that last are, by definition, more significant. And God has put eternity in our heart, and we just can't seem to shake it off. Well, we can, I think, often, and I think we can in Australia. It's why Australia has not given birth to a great number of philosophers. Well, one of the arguments why we haven't, although we've given birth to some pretty good ones. Because it's so much fun in Australia. You know, if you're living in Norway, you've got nothing more to do except sit, you know, surrounded by snow, being depressed and writing poetry. But in Australia, there's 1,000 things we can do out in the sun. You know, it's just beautiful. But nonetheless, every now and then we will be troubled. And in our culture, you're not really allowed to ask the question. Shut up and have another drink. You know, don't think too much. It'll depress you. And so people will they learn to murder the voice. They learn to murder the questions. Or they intoxicate them. Or they find another girlfriend or a new boyfriend. Or this time they go buy a frog across the Andes because they've done it before. So they find some new diversion. And we can drown out the voice. But in the end, this concern about eternity continues to trouble us because God put it there. Right? You were made for more than. We are made for the earth and the beautiful things of earth. But we are made for more than that. St. Augustine, the great African theologian and troublemaker, became a Christian in his midlife, was sort of quite an opponent of Christianity, and particularly was concerned if he became a Christian he would lose some of his pleasures. But he wrote perhaps one of the first introspective books ever written, but he wrote this great quote you may have heard of a few times where he says this: "You have made us for yourself, O God, and our hearts are restless. Someone else."